What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Lineup HQ show. This is number 3 in a kind of a nice long series we're doing, showing you guys how to better use all the tools we have here at RotoGrinders. I've done the first 2 shows with Chris Jamina. We have sent him back into the cave. He's working on Slate Iq. He's working on ownership projections and all that stuff. And we have brought on a new face to RotoGrinders, Jordan Cooper. Jordan, I've known you for a while. We're on the DraftKings player committee. We've been playing DFS for a while. Welcome. They get to see your pretty face here on RotoGrinders. Welcome to the club, my man.
Well, I'm glad to be in the little box. I'm usually watching other people in the box, and this box smells a lot like Big T from last night.
Oh man, well, what did Big T smell like last night?
I don't know. All I know is that he uses that one GIF over and over and over again that I can't get it out of my head.
Oh man, yeah, Big T loves those showdown slates. Didn't see him. Can't believe someone won the $1 million on that anyway. But let's focus here on we're gonna get Jordan's thoughts on how does Jordan use Lineup HQ. He just started working for RotoGrinders, but he's been in the Discord. He's been using Lineup HQ and all the tools on here for a while. Just had himself a nice $20,000 win not too long ago, coincidentally on those flat payout structures, Jordan, by the way. So you didn't get the 100,000.
On the first one, we complain all this time. All this time I entered. Well, I always said that, like, because it was flatter, I played more entries. So if it weren't flat, maybe I wouldn't have had that 5-man Marlin stack in that lineup.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about, hey, now that maybe payout structures might be getting a little flatter. I don't know if we'll hit on it today. Do we adjust our strategy at all? These are all kind of things that, you can do in Lineup HQ. But Jordan does things a little bit differently than most. And one of the things we wanted to talk about today is sort of how to limit your player pool effectively to kind of play like the player you would be. If you were hand making 5 teams, how do I translate those 5 teams into 50 or 100 teams kind of the same way I would make them, but do them in a shorter amount of time without having to click all the buttons or anything like that. So I guess, Jordan, I've got my screen share up here, and let's talk about limiting the player pool. Is it a good thing? Do we want to do it at pitchers? Do we want to do it at hitters? Should we do it at all? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, generally with Lineup HQ, which I use on a daily basis, is that it's not meant to make the decisions for you. It's meant to get the combinations of lineups that you want from the decisions that you already made previously. So that's why first thing I do in Lineup HQ is I exclude every single player from the player pool. I don't want the situation that you'll see a lot of times where if you're optimizing with like the 0 range of outcomes, that it's going to start jamming in the top point per dollar plays, especially at those like the $2,500 Starlin Castros or the Tyler Whites that have a decent enough projection where they're like 2.8x. And if you're optimizing for 50 lineups, you end up with 42% of them. And it's like, well, I don't want to play any of them. It's like, well, why don't you just include the players that you want to play and then keep it simple as much as you can. I kind of like, if you're working with an optimizer for the first time, kind of treat it like your first time in bed. Like, take it slow, take it easy. I know you're going to fumble around.
I'd be on the page for 3 seconds, Jordan.
Well, I'm going to say,
there would be no MMEing if you're understanding what I'm talking about.
Well, that's kind of what I do. I want to only have. I go through and I go like with Slate Iq, and I assess and I base it around like, okay, if I'm going to play cheaper stacks, that means I could play more expensive pitchers or more expensive one-off bats. If I'm going to play expensive stacks, I'm going to need cheap starting pitchers. A lot of people go into Lineup HQ and go, I want to play Chris Sale, I want to play Patrick Corbin tonight at 10K, but I also want to play a Colorado stack, and they wonder why they're not getting enough of that in the optimizers because you don't have enough salary. Or sometimes you're generating a ton of lineups and you're like, oh, I want to keep my pool to this, but you only have 1 second baseman in there. So it's forcing it into 100% of your lineups. You want to make the decisions first and then only include the players that you want.
So do you do this at pitcher and hitter?
I do it everywhere. So everywhere, baby.
So the first thing you do, let me show the guys how to do this. So you click on all the teams right here. There's the all check mark. You click on that and you can see it takes everybody out. and exclude everybody. You take everybody out of the player pool. I have never done this before. So this is, we'll stick to the theme here, virgin territory for me, Jordan. So what do we do from here? Now we go back in. Let's start at pitching, right? We got a 15-game slate tonight. So do the amount of pitchers you use differ on a 15-game slate from a 8-game slate, from a 10-game slate? How do you kind of choose your pitchers? How many do you typically use when you're playing?
I think it doesn't necessarily depend on the games on the slate, but more about how many lineups that you are using. So on a nightly basis, I typically, on slates that are double digits, 10 or more, I may be playing 60 to 80 lineups. And that includes not just in one contest, like in the 20 max $4, and like I use my whole portfolio of contests as all of my lineups. I'm not playing 200 lineups. I'm also not playing 10 lineups. If I'm playing 10 lineups, I'm just hand building. So on a typical slate, I'm looking at, and I'm going, maybe like for tonight, for 15 games, I may only be playing 6 pitchers, 7 pitchers.
Do you separate them into, do you take, a couple high price, a couple mid price, a couple low price, or do you just pick your favorite kind of pitchers across the board?
Well, I look at where I could get the most amount of leverage, since I'm looking for, especially in large field tournaments, like the highest end. I'm looking for what stacks are going to be owned more, what pitchers are going to be owned more. Are the pitchers high variance? I mean, I know Cheese in his articles always says about Robbie Ray, which coincidentally was the pitcher that I won the 20K with, that you play him when he's not chalk, and when he is chalk, you fade him, because those are high variance pitchers that could either strike out 12 batters or also give up 6 runs in the first inning. So looking at that in, like, for instance, tonight's slate, I think some high variance pitchers could be someone like Trevor Bauer, who is figured to be fairly popular at his price, but could be over-owned for that high variance. So it's quite possible I use Trevor Bauer in my pool just to get a high-priced pitcher in there if I don't want to play Corbin or Sale. I may just go underweight on them. So I may include them, but I'll limit my exposure to them, as opposed to maybe not as many people are going to play Chris Sale at Yankee Stadium, and I want to be over the field. If he's going to be, let's say it looks here right now, 13% owned, maybe I want to play 22% of him. And he's a high-priced pitcher, and if I'm looking at cheaper stacks tonight, I'm going to need a high-priced pitcher just to use my salary. I mean, I don't necessarily want to use all my salary, but I also don't want to leave $4,000 on the table. So I do want to include a nice amount of different range pitchers in my pool. So, like, if we use that example, like I would
give me like 6 guys or 6 to 8 guys to throw in here. Just
okay.
We're not so much about plays for tonight, right? A lot of people are going to be watching this later, so just more of the overall strategy. Give me some guys you might be interested in.
Okay, let's go with Sale. All right. Let's go with Caleb Smith against the Padres.
Yep, real quick, guys. If you don't know how to do this right, this is a different way than I think most people make lineups. We've excluded everybody. To add them back in, there's the exclude player button here on the right. You would just click that, and then they're back into your player pool pretty easily. So go back and kind of tell me the players you were adding in here.
Okay, so let's do Sale, Smith. Yep. Let's do Bauer for a little bit of him. Wheeler, and then let's go really cheap. Maybe try Pomerantz, and maybe another cheap pitcher. Let's go with
Molly. Really how about Molly?
Okay, there we go.
We'll throw him in there. I don't mind him. And then do we need anyone else in the mid tier? You can go back to all, and we can see we've got a 10-8, a 9-7, a 9-2, an 8-7, a 6-2, and a 6-0. So you'll be able to get combos. You gotta kind of think like an optimizer. How's it gonna work, right? So you'll be able to get combos of Sale with Pomerantz on, even with some good offenses, and then you'll be able to get Sale with like a Wheeler or Bauer if you were doing cheap stacks, and you can get a combo of Smith and Bauer on a variety of different stacks today. So this allows you to get different combos of pitchers, even though you're only using 6 or 7 or 8 and there's 30 going today. If you got to kind of think a little bit like an optimizer and allow yourself to get different combos in the price tiers is kind of what I'm thinking you're trying to accomplish here, Jordan.
That's exactly right. So I know that the 2 expensive pitchers, I need a cheap stack, which we'll get when we get to bats, we'll pick out 1 or 2. And I know that we could play like a Molly Pomerantz together and get all those Rocky Rockies bats in those expensive prices.
So what your strategy is, you're making sure you get the exact guys you want, not having the whole player pool or anything like that. It's a little different than what I do, but I didn't just win the $20,000. So maybe I'll play like this tonight, Jordan.
I know a lot of people that play what I call a portfolio strategy. I know.
Yeah, that's generally what I do. I play a lot of different things.
But in my general opinion, I want to optimize for the times that I'm right, meaning that I'm going to make my decisions. I'm going to play 5 stacks, 6 stacks. I'm going to play 6 pitchers or something like that. And I know that if I'm 4 times the field on the Giants tonight, they hit 10 runs or whatever, I've given myself so many outs for being right in my other 3 spots and in my pitchers that if I'm right, I have multiple shots at getting first place rather than, yes, I have the correct players in my player pool for the winning lineup. But since I played 120 players, that best lineup ends up with a 0 from some outfielder or a -4 pitcher that if I actually made a decision and said I committed to something beforehand, they wouldn't have been in there.
All right. So we've moved from pitchers, and we'll discuss kind of some of your settings and all this other stuff in a minute here. So how does Jordan look at bats that he's want, right? We've got ownership, we've got Vegas totals, we've got point per dollar, we've got salary, we've got Slate IQ, we've got Plate IQ. There's so many different ways to try to figure out who the right teams are. So give the people some general thoughts on kind of what you look for, and then how do we go about selecting some of our bats from the teams?
Well, just like I wrote in an article recently, when I pick stacks, it's all price, position, and potential. So like potential is like ownership and implied run total. Positions are, does it give me enough combos? Like we see with Seattle, if like Bruce, Vogelback, and Encarnacion are in the lineup like together, bunched together, they're all like first base eligible. You get Abreu and Yonder Alonso for the White Sox, where you can't play the 3 and 4 hitter together because they're both at the same position. So I'm kind of looking, in addition to the run totals, in addition to playing against a high variance pitcher that can get blown up, and then looking at the price per expectation and the leverage you get on Slate IQ, then you start making decisions. That's why looking at like the cheap stack, I'm looking at like the Giants, for instance. So if we go to the Exclude All Hitters tab.
I've got the Giants up here.
You got the Giants up and you go, okay, based on their expected lineup tonight, you get a second baseman, outfielder, catcher, first base, and third base, right all in the top portion of their order. You could also throw in a Sandoval because Belt is also outfield eligible, and you can even throw in Brandon Crawford if you want. Now,
what's kind of your take on the bottom of the order hitters too? I want to. Some people leave them in, some people take them out. I tend to in the National League. Teams, I'll exclude if it's like a really bad 8-hitter. I'll tend to exclude them a lot here. So we're talking about the Giants as a team here. Do you leave them all in, or do you take a couple guys out on the Giants?
Well, I kind of do similar to what you do. I typically don't like 8th hitters in the National League batting in front of the pitcher. Typically, the projection will kind of warrant and show that. I also don't mind lower in the order hitters on away teams because they're guaranteed 9th inning at bats. So it's more likely that the bottom of the order will also get their 4th or obviously if they go off a 5th at bat. So I don't exclude them. I'll still include the whole Giants team in this case, for instance. But like Pillar and Duggar, I may individually go to their max exposure and maybe set it at like 10%.
Yeah, so I have global exposure set at 35%. That's on another page we'll talk about here. So if it's a player you want to, it's a team you like, but a player you don't want a lot of, for example, you would change the max right here on Pilar and Duggar to 5%. So in your 50 lineups, you're not getting 15 of them. You're only getting like 2 or 3 or something like that.
That's exactly what I do. So then you click on the X's and you include all the Giants.
So we'll do that. So the Giants are in there. And I think you just gave everyone some good tips on how to play a little bit more like Jordan. Let's add a couple of other teams in here and just kind of show people, right? The Giants cheaper stack. How do we go about maybe looking at some of the, the chalk? We got Colorado on the slate and they have a run total of 115. I think the last time I looked at Vegas tonight. what do you do with a team like that? If we go to Slate IQ, and if you guys are premium members, you would have access to this. You can see the total ownership on Colorado tonight is going to be pretty high, but Slate IQ takes a look at similar slates from the past, and it tries to determine on those similar slates, this one's going to have a lot of 15 games. Here's what the team with the highest total, how often is it rostered? How often is it the winner? Is there any leverage? Colorado, it's got a negative 1.5. I basically, if it's somewhere from negative 20 to like 20, I don't know, that's kind of like a wash for me. The leverages change quite a bit too as ownership kind of dials in throughout the day. So if you're looking at Slate IQ and you're trying to make decisions off of it, it's pretty much best to always look, 6 o'clock, 6:15, something like that, more towards when the last update comes in. But how do you pick some of the teams with the high totals, the high ownership? What are you looking for there?
Well, sometimes if I'm playing 60 to 80 lineups, I may still have like the highest winning expectation stack in there. I may just not be overweight. I may be under on it just so I have some options there. And that's especially if I'm playing very contrarian stacks, for instance. I don't think you need to go 2% on every slot, but there's a valuability to having chalk in your lineups if you're also playing very contrarian stuff. Like if no one's going to play the Giants, I don't mind a 5-2.
I got bad news for you, Jordan. The Giants' fourth highest owned stack here.
I don't know. I don't think. And Cashner is black magic, so I don't even know if that's even a good idea to stack against him. But they are a cheap stack with a high. 4.2 winner percentage is fairly high for what is a bad Giants office getting into a ballpark upgrade. But like I would try to avoid like looking at a Slate IQ, like Houston seems like a bad value. Or obviously all the way at the bottom. Like sometimes you get these leverage percentages that could be really high, but like their overall expectation is like 0.4%. So just because the field is 0.2% doesn't mean you should be taking a ton of them.
Yeah, you need if you're making 100 lineups, you have 2 lineups with that stack, you're way over the field on something like that, and you're still creating some leverage. So let's throw in a couple more teams into the LineupHQ here from some good offenses. It's a 15-game slate. How many offenses would you normally do on a slate like that?
Well, for 60 to 80 lineups, I'll probably choose 5 stacks.
Yep.
Maybe. So if
that shrinks, let's say if you were making 150 lineups, would you include more teams?
Yeah, if I was doing 150 lineups, I'd probably, because the whole point is I want to be overweight on the decisions that I do make.
Yep.
So like if a stack is only going to be 4% owned and I have 8% of them, that's fine. But 8% of like 50 lineups is what? Is 4 lineups. It's like that's not enough for me. So like 50 lineups, I need to have 15 of that lineup rather than just 4 of them. So for this type of slate, like 5 stacks seems like enough.
Yeah, for the sake of this, again, this show isn't about picking teams for tonight. It's for long-term teaching people how to play. So I'm just going to start throwing some teams in here. I'm going to throw Boston in. They're a team I like tonight. It gives us, it's a different team. They're a little bit more expensive. I think that works out well. You mentioned you wanted to have Colorado in there. What do you do like on a 15-game slate when they're the obvious chalk? I would tend to fade. I don't know, kind of like you. I wouldn't know if I'd completely eliminate them. But when we get into kind of some of the build rules, I would have less Colorado than I would some of the other teams out there, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you completely, but I'd still include all their players into the pool just to give LineupHQ enough information to go by. I'm dramatically limiting my pool as opposed to just leaving everyone in. So I don't want to like continue to go, well, I don't want Iannetta or I don't want McMahon in the pool. It's like I'm already only keeping like 50 people in the pool anyway. So if I get McMahon in 3 lineups, it's no big deal. It's just that I don't want some random person from some other team.
Here's one that I do like. I like the Cubs a little bit tonight. They're gonna. I think they've got enough upside and power. They've got positive leverage on Slate IQ, right? Because it's factoring in. Slate IQ is looking at, hey, the Cubs, their projections are a little bit higher, right? They have some power, they have some upside, and they're not going to be owned a lot by the field, where they're likely to end up on winning lineups at a much higher percentage than the field's going to do it. Now, you don't need 20% Cubs lineups, but if you had, say, 10% or even 5% Cubs lineups, you're way over the field, creating leverage. That's kind of the things I look at to incorporate Slate IQ into some of my decisions. Does that kind of jive with things you look at?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm weighing that in beforehand and then putting everything in. So like, I'm not just going to LineupHQ and then making my decisions. It's like, I'm going there going, these are the 5 teams I want. Let me put in the 5 teams into here.
So I'll throw the Cubs in there against Mikolas. And one of the other things too, if you like, I like the Cubs, and I think Mikolas is going to draw some ownership tonight because he's pretty cheap. Let me see here at our percent ownership. Mikolas isn't really too high up there. I'll take the over on 4%, Jamino. So if you're out there, bump that up a little bit. But I think you'll get some leverage too. If the Cubs stat goes off, you can take out, I don't know, 10% of the lineups that use Mikolas as their starting pitcher or something like that today too. So I like to, in spots, kind of get the double leverage. Is that something you look at all?
Oh, yeah, especially if there's a chalk pitcher, especially a cheap chalk pitcher that isn't all that good to begin with. It's like, yeah, because every negative point from the chalk pitcher plus the hitter points, you actually gain more points on the field than just the hitters going off and just the pitcher getting blown up.
I'm going to throw, give me a couple other teams and we'll move to the other sections here.
Okay. How many teams do we got right now?
I think I got up to 3 right now.
You got up to 3. How about let's throw in the Red Sox.
That was the second team I put in there.
Okay. Let's throw in, who's a good team? Okay. Let's throw in Cincinnati against Patrick Corbin. That seems like a nightmare, but I like the positional. I like Iglesias batting 5th at shortstop and Casali batting catcher, at 6th. It gives you one of those, because I'm going to show you what you should look at after you choose your 5 teams.
All right. And let's get, let me throw another one in. You got another favorite team for tonight?
For tonight, let's try the Royals against Ariel Jurado.
All right. That sounds good. I'll get the Royals in there. All right. So we've got 5 teams. This is Jordan style, right? So we can go back to the all tab, and you'll see the teams that we have, right? They're highlighted at the top here. You can quickly tell the teams we have. Somehow the Mets are in there, but I think that's because we have their starting pitcher in there. But it's just the players, Jordan, from the teams that we want. I have a question for you on one-offs, right? Because if we're not just making 5 threes, right, we'll make some 5 and select one-offs. Are they just from the teams you like, or do you include 5 or 10 of your favorite overall batters from the night, 10 of your favorite value plays? How do you incorporate picking one-offs?
I do pretty much that, but the first thing I'll do before selecting the actual players for one-offs is now go through and look at just the positions of the players that I have in my pool. So I just want to see, how many catchers do I have? Do I have enough catchers? It looks like I have 6 catchers. Yep. That's plenty. That's good. Let's look at first baseman. Oh, that's plenty of first baseman. Let's look at second base. Oh, way too many second basemen. And third base, plenty. Shortstop. Do I have enough? Okay, I have enough shortstops.
And outfield's looking good too.
Okay. So typically, like if you're narrowing down your stack size, the first thing that I'm looking to do is, with the one-offs, have the one-offs in the positions that are the most scarce. So like, for instance, like at shortstop, like if a lot of people are playing Trevor Story and I'm going under on Trevor Story, I can't just have 3 shortstops and Trevor Story, or the other 2 shortstops. I'm going to end up getting it like 45% each. And I don't necessarily want a 45% Jose Iglesias one-off in my lineup as much. So that's why going through and seeing that.
Yeah. So I've gone back to the excluded tab, clicked on shortstops. How do you pick some one-offs? You look at point per dollar, the plate IQ score, fantasy points, price. What's kind of going to lead you into picking some one-offs?
Well, based on the projections that I use, and typically I use Cardi's the bat, I'll look at point per dollar compared to ownership. And I know that ownership may not be out right now.
Yep.
But we see like, Manny Machado against Caleb Smith. That looks like a good point per dollar play.
Smith should be reasonably popular as well, too. So if Machado does have a good game at a cheap price, you get a little bit of extra leverage baked in.
Right. And I don't mind taking cheap like more owned one-offs to just add to my pool, because I'm not specifically targeting them in lineups. I'm going through and trying to get the best mix of my 5-man stacks. And if Machado just happens to appear in 7 of them, so be it. If he appears in 2 of them, so be it. If he appears in none of them, I don't care, but at least he's in my player pool. And if the optimizer, if LineupHQ has a slot for that player in that specific lineup as a one-off, then I'm limiting my player pool, but I'm not keeping 285 people in so that I get random people that I don't want.
All right, so I'm going to throw Machado in, and I think you can take what Jordan said about this and apply it to some of the other positions on your own time for the sake of keeping this video in sort of a shorter time frame. Just kind of take what he said, apply that to some other things. I'm not going to do it right here, but understand the concept of kind of what Jordan was talking about, adding one-offs. What I want to get to now is real quick, I want to go over kind of how you use the build settings page, and then we can talk about what stacks does Jordan make, how do you kind of incorporate all that. We'll make some, and then we'll kind of go over our process as well of it. This isn't just a 5-minute exercise we're doing in LineupHQ, right? Me and Jordan, we both spend an hour, 2 hours kind of getting all the lineups we want by creating our build over and over and over again, looking through it, and then deciding I want more or less of this guy, tweaking it just a little bit, getting a final product, and then using that at the end. It does take a little bit of a while to kind of come across all those things. But what do you kind of do in some of the settings here? Walk us through as quick as possible.
Okay, the general rule for range of outcomes is that the smaller of a player pool that you have, the higher range of outcomes you should set. And the larger player pool that you have, if you have a large player pool, you want a higher range of outcomes, because if you set it to optimal, that's when you're going to get the Tyler White in 42% of your lineups, because he is, like, based on the projections, 2.9x and the most optimal in that spot. So if you have a wide pool, keep your range of outcomes high. If you have a narrow pool, which means I'm only playing the people that I want anyway, I can keep the range of outcomes at sometimes I keep it at 0, but I mean, it could be 5 to 10% at most.
Do you ever use the players per team? Someone in chat's asking that. Instead of this, I think I typically will limit my player pool on the main page instead of using the players per team. And I think you probably do the same, right?
Right. I'm doing 5-man stacks anyway. So like, I don't have to limit anything, because if I get a 5-3, like, I don't have to do that by team, but like the optimizer is just going to do it for me.
Don't think most people, I use this in NBA some, but I don't use this in baseball at all. So what would you've limited, do you go up to like 40, 50% in a range of outcomes? How do you do this?
No, I go even lower. I go to like 10.
Oh, even. Oh, so
when I have a narrow pool, like, I've already chosen my players. I just want the optimal builds out of those players. If I was playing with like 80 players in 50 lineups, I don't want the Tyler White, Starlin Castros in a million lineups by setting it to 0. So that's why I would have to set it to like 30 or 40.
What do you use, in the way you play on uniques?
Typically 3 is fine.
Yeah, I'll do 3 or 4 depending on what I'm feeling. And then max exposure, there's a couple of things you can go through and set kind of a max exposure. You could use the prioritize lineups over max exposure, which will kind of force you to get enough lineups and will go over your max allotment if needed. Usually the typical, when you have less players, you need a higher max exposure. You're just not going to be able to make enough teams. So how do you go and, I spend more time on that on pitchers, trying to make sure I get the percentages of the pitchers I want more so than the hitters. But 35 I got set here, and then we can kind of mess around at pitcher, I think.
I traditionally just leave it at 100 because I just want to see what the optimal is. And then if I need to set it down, I set it down. But typically I'm leaving max exposure at 100, and I'm setting my pitcher max exposures individually.
Yep.
So like if you go there right now to the pitcher pool, since you're only using 6 pitchers.
Yeah.
So, and you have to realize that obviously the combinations in your head, like you can't set Pomerantz and Molly at like max 5 and then expect to get like expensive stacks in. So like Pomerantz and Malley for the cheap pitchers, maybe I'm setting at 20% each.
And then just kind of letting everyone else kind of rotate through or something like that.
Right. And then all the other ones, I may not even set a max. Maybe I like Zach Wheeler a lot today. So what I do is if I like a pitcher a lot that I want to be overweight on, he'll be the only pitcher that I don't set a max exposure for. So let's say Bauer, I want to be underweight on Bauer. So let's say put him at 20. And then you put Caleb Smith at let's say 45. Sale at 45, and then you leave Wheeler open. So like if I'm getting 80% Wheeler, maybe that's what I want, and I could assess from there.
All right. Real quick, do you use the ownership? I use this when I'm making a really wide variety of teams because it just helps me not get the 2 chalk pitchers with Coors and Cleveland, right? I don't want to have the chalkiest teams. I like to be have different lineups somewhere. This is a real quick general way to do it, but I think in your focused approach, I would imagine you probably leave these both at 0.
Yeah, I typically don't touch them at all.
Yeah, so if I was playing a wider swath, I think it makes more sense than how we're talking about here. All of these, I think you would probably leave all those checked as well. Let's go to the hitter stacks page. I've kind of pre-selected for you, Jordan, some stacks here. Let me 1 second. We're not going to be able to kind of go over, we're just going to run a little bit low on time here. So we've pre-selected, they don't show up here, but from our player pool, right? We have KC, we have Boston, we've got a couple of those other teams here. Do you just set them, if we have 5 teams in there, do you put your primary stack at 20%? Do you leave a little bit of leeway? Say like, you got to do some math in your head here, right? You got to kind of know what you're putting in here when you're making your lineups, right? So if we had 5 teams, and we put the primary stack at 20%, it's going to cycle through each team, and then it will repeat like another team. So we'll get a really even distribution. If we had 5 teams and we left it at 25%, it will go through the top 4 teams, and then it has the ability to get more of the highest projected team as well. So we might have a little uneven distribution here. So this is kind of important. You got to kind of think about how you're playing, what teams you're trying to make, how you want to play as a player, because what the percentages you put in here, even if they vary by a small amount, you can really make teams that you're really not intending to make sometimes. So how do you kind of decide what you're going to do here?
Well, typically I'll set, if I'm playing 5 teams, that's obviously 20% each. So I'll start it at 20% for each of the individual teams. And then I'll go in and I'll go, well, I think if I'm going to play some expensive starting pitchers, I'm probably going to need more San Francisco stacks. So I'm going to set maybe San Francisco to like maybe 28%.
All right.
For instance.
Let's throw that in here. And even though, right, we put 20%, it's only pulling from our player pool. So we didn't have the Yankees in our player pool. Even though it's at 20%, I'm not going to get any Yankees here. At least I'm hoping we don't get any Yankees. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So let's try to run this. And I want to talk too about stacks. One of the important things to do every day is go to Slate IQ, and you can see the leverage on the stacks here. And what you'll notice, the bigger the slate, the more in favor the 5-man stacks are, right? So we have a 15-game slate today, and there's no surprise. The best leverage stack is the one that contains the most correlation, is a 5-man with a 3. I'll typically mix 5, 5-2, 5 and 1 offs. I'll throw in some 4-3s because it just kind of lets you get a couple different combinations if you select maybe 10 1-offs instead of the one we did. But I think on a big slate like tonight, I would just be making 5-mans. And as you can see here, I've done some work for you. I've pre-selected only 5-mans, Jordan.
Okay, but I'd keep it even more simple. I believe in the KISS theory.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. So I what I typically do, and I think for people that are beginners to intermediate in using LineupHQ or optimizers in general, because we're not even getting into even more advanced stuff where you're generating lineups 50 times and tweaking individual guides. Because
we'll do another video. We'll get you on probably some point next week, right? And we'll do another video where we kind of bypass all the stuff we already talked about, and we'll spend a lot of time on this screen. So
right. So to me, I just select 5X and that's it. So give me 5X and 100%. I want to make sure I'm getting my 5-man stacks right.
All right. So there's a couple questions on what we sent on secondary stack. I think if you were trying to get 5 3s and 5 2s, I would probably, probably just put a 20% in here if I had 5 teams or something like that. I don't know. Jordan is just trying, he wants his 5-man stack, and then he wants the best players around his 5-man stack. That's what Jordan's going to do here. We can talk a little bit more about primary, secondary on another show, but we're getting inside Jordan's head here. And let's kind of see what we get here. I'm going to build 50 lineups. It will take about 2 minutes. Actually, it's a little bit less because we really restricted the player pool here. The more teams, the more players, the more things you have, the lineup builder will take a little bit more time to generate lineups. So you can see here, I want to spend about 5 to 10 minutes here, and then we're going to cut this one, Jordan. So let's go through how we kind of see, what did I just make, right? I made 50 lineups. What do I have here? So the first thing I do is I usually go to starting pitchers, and I see if my starting pitchers are within reason of kind of what I wanted and want in my head, right? You said you might have liked Wheeler tonight. You were fine with him getting up to 100. Looks like the projections like him too, because we got 90% Zach Wheeler here, and we got a pretty even distribution around the range here, right? So if I didn't want 90% Wheeler, maybe I would go to like a 75, and then it would kind of fill in everybody else here. But this is how you kind of make the lineups how you actually want to play, is you either go position by position. We'll get to the stacks in a second here. But the first thing I do is I make sure my pitchers are basically around what I actually want them to be in my head. And you can do that with the min-max pretty easy. You can even see here, a lot of people don't know this. If you want to see all your Zach Wheeler lineups, you can click on the 90% and all your Zach Wheeler lineups come up over here on the right. So if you wanted to actually see, oh, my Tyler Mahle lineup, what do my 8 Mahle lineups look like? You can see those pretty easily. You can tinker with them over here, but I typically go to starting pitcher first, Jordan.
I do that, and as well as the first thing I noticed in this build is that I wanted to be underweight on Colorado stacks.
Yep.
And obviously the projections love Colorado.
Yeah.
And it turns out I'm getting way, way too much Colorado.
Yep.
So I would go right into the build rules and then go to the hitter stacks and then set Colorado. Since I set the Giants up to 28, I'll put the Colorado now at 12 because that now it all equals 100. And then I may even like up like maybe Boston, who's an expensive stack, and put them up to like maybe 25.
Yeah. And if the slate was smaller, I'll typically zero out if Jordan's not using the secondary stack to make the math a little easier. You just gotta, it's kind of you gotta remember the teams that you had from the first side in Jordan's strategy here, and understand that even though your stack exposure is set at 580, it's really not. You just got to kind of remember the math here. So let's build the 50 lineups again real quick, and we'll kind of see this on the stack summary. We'll move over to that, and you can see that Colorado was probably one of the higher stacks. They've now been moved to basically our 4th stack that we're using. So just by doing that, we're getting a lot more of the other teams. We're getting a lot less Colorado. We're also not getting too many Cubs, so maybe we need to tweak a couple things. If you wanted some more Cubs, you can boost them up a little bit. But between the player exposures at pitcher, you'll see here, right, I dumped Wheeler down to 75. We landed there pretty easily. It boosted everybody else up a little bit. But then you want to see your stack summary as well to make sure you're getting the stacks you actually want, right? If Jordan didn't want to go pretty heavy on San Francisco, we might have to change some things around here.
I also want to show also in adjusting like one-off usage from the stacks. So if you go to the player exposures right now, you see 2 very chalky players from Colorado there, Story and Dahl. And that player exposure of like over 50% isn't in the stacks. It's just that Story and Dahl are being used as one-offs a lot in your other stacks. And let's say, especially with positional scarcity, I may not mind having a lot of Trevor Story one-offs. David Dahl obviously in a 15-game slate, there are a ton of outfielders. I may not want a chalky David Dahl as a one-off in stack, so I'll go to maybe his individual player projection line and set his max exposure at maybe 25%.
All right, so I'll throw him at 25%. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, where it's not a click a button, you get exactly what you want. you have to go in here and you got to add your own special touches to it, right? You know, we wanted a certain amount of Wheeler. Jordan wants to take Dowell down. So, right, we went from 58%, and we'll click the build lineups here, and we're going to have half as much David Dahl as we just had, and he won't be appearing in as many one-offs on the next build. And as you can see here, David Dahl, where is he? Well, he's right at 22% because we lowered him just enough to kind of get him in there.
And that also looks like his total of 11 lineups.
Yep.
Looks like mostly David Dahl is only in Colorado stacks.
Yeah, we have 12 Colorado stacks here. So it's looking like he's probably just going to appear in those now for the most part. So you got some tips and tricks from Jordan on how to make what I would call a more narrowly focused build. We'll try to do one some point next week where we expand on them a little bit. If you want to have, you know, this is if none of these teams are the highest scoring or even the second highest scoring or the third highest scoring, Jordan's probably not going to make any money tonight, right? He's trying for the win, which is a very good strategy, right? We're trying to get that top prize. But if none of these teams is in the top 3 or 4 in scoring, he's probably going to lose close, if not all, of his entry fees tonight. And there's ways to kind of mitigate that where you're not as focused as Jordan, but you're also less likely to lose your entire kind of what I like to call portfolio in a single night. So there's a lot of different ways to play. I don't think there's a wrong way. I don't think there's a right way. It's all based on trying to play how you want to play based on your risk tolerances and what you're trying to accomplish. And that's what we're trying to show you basically with all these videos on LineupHQ. So we got some good thoughts from Jordan, and we'll run it back at some point next week. Maybe we can expand, show you a different type of build. How does that sound, Jordan?
Sounds good to me. Maybe this is the build that wins tonight.
It could be, yes. We screenshot this lineup, and this will be the one that neither one of us entered that wins the 100,000 tonight. So thanks to all you for watching. If you ever have LineupHQ questions, you can email into support. You can send me a DM on RotoGrinders, DM me on Twitter. The DMs are always open, and I'll try to help you out as best I can. And if I can't, I'll find someone else that can help you. Jordan, it was fun having you here on RotoGrinders. Looking forward to all your content. If you're on those soccer streets, watch out. Jordan is out there trying to take your money. Very, very good DFS player is Mr. Jordan. So we're going to head on out of here. Thanks to everybody for watching, and stay tuned next week. We'll try to get another one of these in for you. Just a different way to build, kind of be a bigger, wider portfolio, something like that. Any final thoughts, Jordan?
No, if you have any questions, I'm always in the RotoGrinders Discord. I'm pretty active in the premium MLB and the back channel. So if you're going through LineupHQ and have any questions about any of the settings or limiting your player pool like this, just mention me there and leave the discussion up to even other people in the chat. We'd love to have you there.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week. We out, ya.